I actually just got out of a really fantastic conversation and wanted to shoot a quick recording of one of the notions that got some clarity. I apologize if I'm actually repeating myself. I've really frankly lost track of most of what has been said in these videos, but this is interesting enough that it bears repeating, and I'm certain that I'll say it differently. So, if you're familiar with a philosopher named Kant, he made a distinction between what he called the noumenal and the phenomenal. The noumenal is reality, such as it actually is, and the phenomenal is that thing which we can actually ever, under any circumstances, actually be in relationship with perceptually. Um, so, I look out the window and I see a tree. In point of fact, all I'm able to really say about it is that uh, the way that my eyes perceive light and the way that light relates to tree, at least under my understanding of physics and optics, generates the notion that there's a tree there. But in some deep fundamental way, I can't ever actually have direct access to its noumenal essence. So what I want to do is I actually want to talk about this fact as being a fact of reality, but it's actually more important than just an interesting observation because it creates an intrinsic gap. And that intrinsic gap is what's interesting. So if you imagine this notion of the noumenal and then the notion of the phenomenal, one of the critiques of Kant that was actually quite nice is evolution seems to actually work by the process of giving us feedback from the noumenal itself, which is to say this. Let's say I look in front of me and I'm taking a walk and I notice that there's a very deep hole that leads to jagged rocks. Now, this is a phenomenal observation. I am phenomenally experiencing something that I can describe to you as such. However, if I fall into the hole and die, that fact, the fact of my death, is in fact a noumenal event. Now, of course, it's an event that I can't actually experience at all phenomenally, but evolution, which proceeds by fitness, which is in fact actually just a cashing out of the degree to which the noumenal phenomena reinforce choices made by phenomenal agents, is a very interesting dynamic. So what I actually have is a relationship. I have the relationship of what is actually happening at the noumenal level, and then I have the relationship of what is perceived to be the case at the phenomenal level, which now I'm proposing is in fact an ontological gap. That gap is just going to exist full stop, but it's a gap that actually has a really interesting relationship. It's not that the noumenal kind of exists out in nowhere space that we can kind of think about if we are interested in being German philosophers. It's a way of naming that thing which we can't ever fully comprehend or perceive, but nonetheless actually is the cashing out of how we interrelate with that which exists. So then we talk about how that shows up in terms of how we make choices. We have a problematic, which is we're always going to be operating with some sort of sense-making schema. This is the phenomenal, right? The phenomenal is the sense-making. We're experiencing phenomena and we're endeavoring to make sense of it so that we can make better choices. Our choices are then going to involve actions that go into the noumenal reality and are going to cash out through the noumenal channel in the actual fitness that it shows up for, right? And so this is how we end up in this really interesting problem space or opportunity space, which is, let's say I have a situation where I am making a choice based upon my phenomenal heuristics that is ultimately a bad choice. Right? Now, here's where we talk about something like, say, being in delusion. Delusion is when you end up choosing to connect with and hold the integrity of your phenomenal schema, your sense-making framework, rather than allowing it to change under more fundamental feedback from the noumenal. Now, one may wonder, how is it that one goes about actually ever perceiving that more fundamental feedback from the noumenal? And this is actually the subject of a different conversation, which we might call intelligence in depth, which I think also is a very interesting thing that I talked about 2 days ago. But let's talk about some other interesting things. So you're always going to be faced, the language of wants and needs. So you want at the level of the surface of your phenomenal schema. you need at the level of depth. And then there's something that is in fact below what you need, which is the noumenal. But you will be able to perceive that noumenal precisely through the degree to which it cascades up your needs. I'll give you a concrete example. Let's say that you feel thirsty. All right. So what's happening is think about the stack of sense-making frameworks that are actually handing this notion up. You feel thirsty. What that really means is that you have some sense of, say, your lips are dry, which mine are, or a sense that your eyes are dry, or a sense of just being low energy, or a sense of something that you have begun the process of constructing a way of making sense of that you now name as being thirsty. Now, on top of that, you're then going to have a higher order schema, which is, okay, how do you respond to it? Now, let's say you've got a dysfunctional one. Let's say your sense is, I'm thirsty, therefore I'm going to drink a Coke, my villain of the moment. That actually turns out to be a bad choice-making schema, right? I've got a sense-making framework that is in fact accurately telling me I'm thirsty, but the sense-making schema that's on top of that is saying, actually, I want a Coke, right? So wants and needs actually have a whole space in between them. And the want space is the connection between sense and choice. Want is, okay, what I want is what choice do I make, and sense is what need am I trying to fulfill. And as we've mentioned in the past, one of the problems we face with as humans is we're really bad at that gap. Like we're really, really bad at being able to connect good choice making to good sense making, which is to say we're really bad at connecting our wants to our needs. But now I'm going to describe the needs structure in more depth, because what happens is this. So I sense that I'm thirsty. Well, what's happening there? What's actually happening is something more along the lines of there is an actual presence in my body of an inadequacy of H2O molecules. Well, what does that mean? Right? Well, what's actually happening there is there's an actual presence in my body of an inadequacy of the appropriate substrate components for well-functioning metabolism at the level of mitochondria, for example. What's happening there, right? What's happening there is the homeostatic feedback systems that are necessary for the well-functioning of my adaptive strategies in my environment are being pushed out of optimality. Well, finally, what's happening there is I'm becoming less fit, right? And so now we've looped all the way from the phenomenal to the noumenal. I'm becoming less fit is being parsed at micro levels, kind of, what's that called? Leveraging up or trim tabbing up from super sensitive components that are probably billions of years old, ATP systems not getting the resource flow that they needed, and sensors that are indicating that and upregulating it all the way up to my, choice-making human that is going out and buying a can of Coke. Open, glug, glug, glug. So now we have this really interesting concept, right? We've got a notion now of the way that the noumenal fits in relationship to the phenomenal. The way that the phenomenal has a relationship between choice-making is the feedback from the phenomenal to the noumenal. I make a choice, I buy a Coke. I'm now connecting physical reality and then shifting my state in actual noumenal reality, whatever it is, which then cycles all the way back around and through this micro trim tabbing thing to how it actually cashes out. Now, okay, shit, it turns out by making the continuing choice to drink Coke, I'm not satisfying the actual underlying needs for fitness. I'm becoming less fit, and something happens. In this case, maybe I die. And of course now, bam, evolution has now sent a very, very strong signal to the thing that used to be me that ain't a good choice. It has removed whatever fucking, huge, gigantic, genetic, epigenetic, emotional, cognitive, phenomenal thing that was me from at least the thing that evolution is pushing. Well, I could go all over the place after that, but I think that's that. Here we'll stop there and let that sink in.